My name is Bulisa, and this is Judy, and we are both reef rangers at REEFolution Foundation. Yeah, we're both reef rangers at REEFolution Foundation, and basically what we do as reef rangers is we aim to restore the coral reefs here in the Wasini Channel. Yeah, so we are located in Shimoni, that is at the south coast of Kenya, as you heard, and we're in and around the environments of National Park, Kisite Mpunguti National Park, which is a hotspot of biodiversity in the Western Indian Ocean. We are excited to be here with you and looking forward to learning and teaching as we go along. So without further ado, I think we'll just get right into it. Yeah. So, So we can't talk about coral restoration without talking about the coral itself. Yeah, so we have to first ask ourselves what a coral is. Yeah, a coral is closely related to sea anemones and jellyfish. Coral polyps are very, very small, tiny, small-bodied animals. So let's talk about the structure a little bit. So if we look deeper at the coral polyp, we see an animal that is surrounded by a corallite and a skeleton that's made of calcium carbonate. So this feature distinguishes it from close relatives like sea anemones. Polyps have one opening, a mouth that is surrounded by tentacles. And these tentacles have nematocysts that are stinging cells, which enable the coral polyp to catch small organisms. The body of a polyp contains digestive and reproductive tissues. So we'll just focus a little bit on this diagram here. So as I said, the animal is surrounded by this calcium carbonate skeleton. And these tentacles work to capture small organisms. It has one opening here, which is the mouth, and below the mouth, we have the stomach. And the body, as we said, as I will reiterate the fact that the body contains the stomach and reproductive organs. Yep. So what happens when you look further at the polyp itself? Yeah. We see zooxanthellae. Most tropical reef-building corals have an additional source of food, which is often the main source of energy. This source of energy is facilitated by zooxanthellae, which are microscopic algae that live in symbiosis with corals. They are single-celled photosynthetic organisms that effectively share the food they produce through photosynthesis with coral polyps. In exchange, the polyps offer zooxanthellae nutrients in the form of waste as a product of their digestion. And they offer the zooxanthellae a nicely protected home as a plus. This symbiotic relationship is unique because it gives tropical corals sufficient energy to grow relatively quickly enough to build reefs. Yeah. So let's look at an actual coral that's different from the diagram I've just shown you. So if we look at the red circle here, we see that a coral polyp has been circled. If we look on the outside, we have the corallites, which is once again the calcium carbonate skeleton. And we have the mouth right in the middle, surrounded by tentacles that in this picture are actually retracted. Zooxanthellae are largely responsible for the green, brown, and red colors observed in a large majority of corals. Other colors like blue, purple, violet are a result of the coral polyp itself. Individual polyps are extremely small in comparison to a coral reef, and polyp sizes vary. However, most usually fall around the 1 millimeter diameter mark. The genus Fungia has the largest coral polyps that can grow to about 12 centimeters in diameter. So we see a variation in the size there. And how do corals reproduce? Corals can either be male, female, or hermaphrodites, and they reproduce either sexually or asexually. Sexual reproduction promotes genetic diversity, while asexual reproduction is usually attributed with rapidly increasing the size of a colony. Asexual reproduction results in colonies that are genetically identical to each other, and it usually happens in 2 ways: budding and fragmentation. Budding results when a polyp is formed directly from the parent polyp. So a parent polyp will split itself into 2, and that results in budding. Fragmentation, on the other hand, can occur intentionally, but is mostly unintentional. In cases where it occurs intentionally, the coral will actually disintegrate a specific area on its skeleton, allowing for easier breakage by waves, for example, predation, or animals resting on top of the corals. Unintentional fragmentation occurs when a colony is subjected to physical disturbances such as storms, fish predation, fishing traps, amongst others. The chances of survival after fragmentation are largely dependent on the substrate the fragment finds itself on and the fragment size. So corals require a hard substrate to latch onto and attach themselves to before they can start establishing themselves into a thriving colony. I think we can look at the picture on the left here. Here's one of a diver who's holding a coral fragment. In this case, this fragment has actually been grown and nurtured on a nursery tree, and we'll see more of what that is and more of what that's like as we go along in the presentation. On the right hand, the picture that I am highlighting now shows coral fragments that are laying on the ocean floor. And these fragments are actually in rubble, so the chances of survival are not as high as they would be if they found themselves on a rock, for example, or an old piece of coral that's actually dead. So just to reiterate the point that corals require hard substrates to attach themselves to so that they can thrive and grow. Let's talk about sexual reproduction for a bit. And as I previously mentioned, sexual reproduction results in diversified gene pools. Majority of all hard corals are hermaphrodites, while others have separately sexed individuals and in some cases, entire colonies. Many reproduce sexually through spawning, and this occurs when sperms and eggs are released into the water column. The gametes then float towards the surface where fertilization occurs. A planula is formed after successful fertilization. So planula is basically what a zygote is to animals. And here's on the left here, we have a picture of corals that are spawning in a controlled environment in an aquarium. And on the right, we have spawning of a colony that's in a more natural environment. The planulae then look for a hard substrate to settle on, where they develop into an individual polyp. Some planulae can survive for months on end before finding that hard substrate, and that's due to the symbiotic relationship with zooxanthellae, even in that early stage. I think it's worth noting that that doesn't occur in all coral species, but in some coral species. And mass spawning events are relatively common, where colonies of varying species synchronize to form one large spawning event. Mass spawning events in the Western Indian Ocean where we're located, however, are not as widely understood. Little is known about whether they really even occur in the region or not. However, mass spawning in events in the Great Barrier Reef, I'm sure we know, most of us know about those spawning events, and in the Caribbean are much better understood. And the spawning events are controlled by, have various factors that influence them, such as temperature, the lunar cycle, time of day. All these different factors come together and influence the spawning event in those regions, in the Caribbean and the Great Barrier Reef, and other regions where mass spawning events are more common. So how do we move from the coral, from the individual coral, to what is widely known as a coral reef? So most corals live in colonies. So the size of a colony tends to be much, much larger than the polyps that are making up that colony. This is a really interesting picture. It was taken in the Wasini Channel, which is our main area of restoration. And this is a natural reef that is completely exposed during a low spring tide. Yeah, so the corals are actually left completely exposed, and when the tide comes in, then they're covered by the water column again. So what this picture shows is just various colonies that come together and make the artificial reef. In the background, we can see other smaller colonies that are distributed in patches. I think the next slide shows more of that. So on the left here, we have a picture of another coral reef that has various coral species that are coming together to make up the reef. And once again, if I might reiterate, these colonies are made up by hundreds and hundreds of thousands of individual polyps. Yeah, and on the right here, we have another situation where a coral reef was exposed during a low spring tide. And even in this small area here, we can see different colonies, different species coming together to form that reef. So there are 4 types of coral reefs, and I will go through all 4 in a little bit. Fringing reefs, which are the first at the top left picture on your screen. Fringing reefs grow along coastlines. They tend to be separated from the shore by shallow lagoons. Right next to the fringing reef picture, we have a barrier reef, which is this picture here. And unlike fringing reefs, barrier reefs are characterized by a deep, widespread lagoon that separates the reef from the shore. Barrier reefs consist of various reefs combining together and forming a vast barrier along the coastline. The largest coral reef ecosystem is the Great Barrier Reef that I'm sure we're all familiar with, that extends for more than 2,000 kilometers. On the bottom left here, we have an atoll. And how an atoll forms is a coral reef will form around an island or an underwater volcano. And slowly, as that island or underwater volcano sinks, then as it sinks, the coral reef is left exposed at the surface in a nice circle around the former island or former volcano. On the right here, we have patch reefs, which I must add are the most common reefs we have here in the Wasini Channel. And these are basically reefs that grow in isolation to other reefs. They usually occur between fringing reefs and barrier reefs. Coral reefs are the most biodiverse marine ecosystems. An estimated 25% of all marine species find their food or shelter in coral reefs. An estimated 7,000 species of fish, invertebrates, plants, turtles, birds, and marine mammals are supported by coral reefs in terms of both food and or shelter. So here are three pictures that are taken here in and within the Wasini Channel, and you can just see how these ecosystems are bustling with life of both flora and fauna. So if you ask me, it's a pretty cool office that we find ourselves working in. Here are more pictures displaying the biodiversity. Once again, these pictures are taken in and within the Wasini Channel where we're located. So we have a marine mammal here, we have a reptile, turtle here, we have a large shoal of fish here, and the biodiversity just goes on and on. So coral reefs are often compared to rainforests regarding their biodiversity. And it may sometimes come as a surprise that coral reefs actually only occupy about 1% of the ocean's floor. And if you ask me, that gives more need for restoration, especially in areas where they're rapidly degrading. Coral reefs come about with various socio-economic benefits. And so in addition to their ecological prowess, they also have immense economic value, providing food, income from tourism, shoreline protection, and in recent years, drug development. That last point is relatively new, new forms of science that are looking into using some of the organisms that are found in coral reefs to manufacture or develop medicine. We have on the picture here, I think it's self-explanatory, fisherman coming from the sea with a healthy catch. The picture in the middle, I find pretty cool. It's a picture of the inside of a basket trap, which is a common trap, traditional trap that's used by fishermen in the area. And on the right here, as you may note, the photographer took full advantage of a low spring tide to try and grasp and get all elements of the coral reef ecosystems here in the Wasini Channel. So on the far most right, we have another reef that was exposed during a low spring tide. And basically what it's showing is how the waves break as they come into contact with the coral reefs. So the coral reefs form a barrier and they reduce the wave size, speed, and intensity as they come into into the shoreline. Here we have more pictures. Here we have a fisherman who's gone out on his boat. We have a restaurant that's on the Wasini Island, and it's quite popular with tourists. On the bottom left here, we have a photographer who's taking advantage of the clear waters to take a picture of what looks like a guitar ray. And on the right here, we have a group of tourists who are dolphin watching. Unfortunately, these beautiful environments are constantly under threat. And the main global threat that affects coral reefs is global warming, which results into bleaching. And what bleaching does with coral fragments or coral reefs is that it pushes these corals past a certain heat threshold. And once they are past that threshold, then they expel the algae that they live in symbiosis with. As they expel this algae, then as a result, they have way less energy to support other metabolic processes to recover in case of predation or breakages or disease. So they have way less energy, and over time, if left in that bleach state, they will eventually continue to deteriorate and eventually die. On the left here, we have an acropora colony that is completely bleached. And on the right here, we have a smaller coral fragment that's completely bleached as well. In the Wasini Channel, the heat threshold is 30 degrees Celsius. So once the water passes 30 degrees Celsius, the corals start bleaching. And the main way we can try and adapt to this, is by trying to make these coral reefs as resilient as possible. And obviously we keep pushing to curb the effects of climate change and the burning of fossil fuels. I think last week's presentation reiterated that fact. We have more localized threats that affect our coral reefs. We have unsustainable tourism, recreational activities. This picture here shows what's actually a common practice, where divers or snorkelers come into physical contact with the reefs, breaking them into small, tiny fragments that they can't exist in, sometimes exposing coral tissue to potential diseases. On the right here, we have anchors. Once they latch onto the coral reef, as the anchor is brought up, it actually breaks the coral completely. We have ghost nets, which are essentially nets that are forgotten at sea. And these can wrap around the corals and entangle the corals. At the bottom left here of the screen, we have pollution. And I must add that pollution is not restricted to plastic pollution. It can be anything. It can be oil spills. It could be industrial pollution. But I think what comes to light mostly is plastic pollution. And I feel like more emphasis should be placed on other forms of pollution as well that affect these fragile ecosystems. And on the right here, we have unsustainable fishing. Once again, it can include various forms of unsustainable fishing. In this particular picture, we see what looks to be the results of blast or dynamite fishing, which is just as it sounds, it happens when fishermen drop dynamite into the water and blow the dynamite and collect the fish that float right to the surface. So very, very destructive form of fishing. So if we come together and try to curb both the global and local threats, then in the future, these fragile ecosystems have a chance of survival. And in some cases where they're degraded, we have a chance of bringing them back to the natural state. And I feel like that's a nice segue into the next phase of our presentation, which is coral restoration. And we'll go into the work we do here at REEFolution, and Judy will take us on from there.
Thank you, Bulisa. Hello everyone. My name is Judy Nduta. I'm a marine resource management graduate from the Technical University of Mombasa, and I'm recently working with REEFolution Foundation. So what we do at REEFolution is coral restoration. So we'll ask, what is coral restoration? So coral restoration is the process of assisting the recovery of an ecosystem that has been degraded, damaged, or destroyed. So this is a picture showing some of the rangers or some of the divers that help in the restoration process. So on this picture, we can see a healthy reef, a degraded reef, and a dead reef. So a healthy reef is a reef that is characterized by lots of hard corals, lots of soft corals, lots of crustaceans, beautiful fish, clear waters, and that's basically what a healthy reef looks like. And on the picture on this side, we can see a degraded reef. So it's not dead because we can see a healthy part over here, but it's overgrown by macroalgae. So this can happen due to various conditions. But one of the conditions that can bring about such an condition is overfishing of herbivorous fish. So we have herbivorous fish such as surgeonfish, parrotfish. They feed on this algae. So when we remove them from the ecosystem, there's an unhealthy balance in the ecosystem. So that brings about the overgrowing of the macroalgae. On this picture right here is an example of what we have here at our channel. So this is as a result of blast fishing and dynamite fishing. which was done before. Earlier, fishermen were using it to fish, but right now it's an illegal fishing method. So this is what we are dealing with right now. And we are trying to assist the recovery of such an ecosystem to a healthy reef. So with this, corals, as Bulisa already said, corals need a hard substrate for them to recruit and then to grow. So what we do is, as we'll see in the next slides, try and provide hard substrates for them to attach on themselves. So this is a picture, another showing what might happen when there's an unhealthy balance in the ecosystem, when there's an removal of herbivore fish and carnivorous fish in the ecosystem. So on this picture, we can see over lots and lots of urchins. So urchins really can degrade an area really fast, and they leave an area very bare, like we can see from this picture. So these urchins are moving this way, so they really clear out an area. So that we can understand our area, you can see an area. So we are here. This is Shimoni. Shimoni is in the south coast of Kenya, right here. So across us, we are very fortunate to be, across us we have Wasini Island. So it's right across us over here. And we're very fortunate to be close to the Kisite Punguti Marine Protected Area. So that's a plus for us. And you can see how the corals are distributed from this yellow color. So this shows the corals around this area. So the red part here is showing our coral restoration study area, where we have the restoration project. So this is a close-up look of the area that, excuse me, that we're doing the restoration. So we are here. So this is Shimoni, and we have 3 coral restoration zones. So the first zone is the fishing zone. So this zone, we have agreed with the community to fish in this area. So fishermen are allowed to fish in this area, but using sustainable fishing methods. So sustainable fishing methods like hand lines are allowed in this area. And then we have the locally managed area. So we have, this area is co-managed between us and the Mkwiro BMU. So Mkwiro is the village right across us. So we co-manage this area, and this is where we put our structures. And this red part is showing the fish breeding area. So we have agreed with the community and the fishermen around this area not to fish in this area, to allow the population, the fish abundance and the populations to increase in this area. So yes, so on the next slide, I'll show the restoration method that we do here that is working on these areas, because restoration methods differ according to an area. So as Bulisa already said, our area mainly has patch reefs, and the method that works best for us is the coral gardening. So the coral gardening restoration method involves 3 stages. So the first stage is where we collect the coral fragments. So these are the corals that have been broken by waves or currents. So we collect them, and then we put them into an intermediate nursery stage. So in this stage, we allow these corals to grow. We give them a chance to grow. So what this stage does is to provide optimal conditions for these corals to grow. So it allows light to come onto these corals. The wave water movement around this area is nice, and the chances of sedimentation is less, considering this structure is up from the ground. Also, the pipes that we use are very thin. That's preventing the chances of overgrowing of the macroalgae on these structures. So after these corals have been grown, we grow them for about 6 months to an year, depending on the coral species. And then we outplant them onto our artificial reefs. So the idea of having artificial reefs is to ensure that these corals have a hard substrate for them to attach on them, or to attach on. So we'll see more on these artificial reefs as we go on. So this is the nursery tree. This is a close-up of how it looks. So these are corals that have been in the nursery for a period of time. So they attract fish. And the good thing about these nurseries that we've seen is they attract fish. And these fish nibble on this algae, on these pipes, and they ensure that the macroalgae is not overgrowing on these structures. So on the right side picture is a mini tree. So the mini trees, mostly we use them for experiments. So like an example of an experiment is the depth gradient experiment. So what you're trying to see with the depth gradient experiment is to see how different coral species, to see the coral growth and survival of these coral species under different depth. So we place these mini trees in different depth in our channel. And to conclude on this nursery trees, we ensure that maintenance is very necessary for these trees, because this is plastic. So we regularly go to around these nursery areas to ensure that this nursery tree is maintained, is cleaned, and to ensure that wave or any currents is not messing up with them. So on the artificial reefs, so this is an animation of how our artificial reefs look like. So one of them is the bottle reef. So as you can see, it's bottles and concrete. So we attach the corals onto these mouths. And also this concrete ensures that there's coral recruits on this area. So this a cage or a dome. So this is a cage, and a dome is a bigger version of this. So we attach these corals on the intersections of these wires. Excuse me. And on this one is a layered cake. So this cake basically is like a cake as it looks here. So these artificial reefs all attract different, or we are trying to see how different the interaction between these artificial reefs and the different fish biodiversity. For example, on this layered cake, the fish that are mostly found around this cake is we mostly find eels, we have porcupine fish that hide under this here, we have stingrays, and the bottle reefs, when they're put together, they mainly attract like juvenile fish and other mature fish, adult fish. So this is how they look like underwater. So we call this a perch. So a perch is a combination of a bottle reef, cakes, and cages and domes. So we put all of them together to ensure that different fish populations are in this area. So this is one of our divers attaching the corals onto this cage. So we can see how pretty after a period of time, these corals start to attach or fuse together. Like we can see here, you can see how pretty and amazing they look underwater. So this is what we normally see when we go diving regularly. So they attract different fish species. As you can see here, we have big fish and different species of corals, as you can see. And these are corals that have been placed over a period of time, because corals do take a period of time to mature and grow. So these are close up. You can see how beautiful this looks. These are the cages. After a period of time, they fuse together, and this is what we are trying to do, to assist the recovery of this degraded area. So we can see how beautiful this looks. This is one of my favorite artificial reefs, the domes. You can see how pretty it looks underwater, and it attracts various fish populations. So to see our success, we can see a picture that was taken in 2019 and a picture that was taken in 2021. So we can clearly see the differences between these pictures. So the coral on this dome is less compared to this other picture. So the corals have really grown. you can see the fish populations in this 2019 picture is less or few compared to this one. So this attracts various fish populations in this area. So this is what we are trying really to do. So on this other slide, excuse me, I'll play a video to just show a glimpse of what underwater looks like. So that's how beautiful and pretty the ecosystem and the artificial reefs that we placed in the channel. So as I was saying, sorry for the interruption. So that's how our structures look like underwater. So we can see different species of corals. We can see some of the visitors that we encounter underwater, like this pretty lionfish. We have different fish in the area. So that's just a glimpse of what we see underwater. So to my conclusion, so we have some of the challenges that we face with the coral restoration. So one of them is unsustainable fishing practices. As we can see on this picture, we have ghost nets. So these are nets that have been placed in the water for a period of time without being removed from the water. So sometimes they tangle onto our structures. So another challenge is when you have lack of awareness with the fishermen, some of them may place their structures onto the corals rather than straight from the corals. So this is a basket trap. So this is allowed on the fishing zone, but sometimes the fishermen may place it on the corals. Another challenge is cost. Coral restoration on itself is very expensive, and it involves a lot of labor, a lot of the cost in diving, the research that goes behind the restoration, the research, the education. It's very expensive in itself. So these are some of the challenges that we face with the restoration, but they do not stop us from continuing the beautiful work that we do here. So some of the benefits of the restoration, one of them is increased genetic diversity and potential for adaptation with the different coral species that we restore. We prevent the extinction of some species. We assist the species migration to new locations when we move corals from one area to another. Provide critical ecosystem services in the water, and that's one of the goals of the restoration. So to conclude my presentation, these are some of the amazing divers and restoration people that are involved in the restoration part. So thank you so much for having us, and I hope it was really eye-opening for all of us. Thank you.
Everybody, you are now welcome to ask your questions. Please use the reaction tools at the bottom of the screen, or you can write your question in the chat. I see we already have Peter Turner, has had his hand up for quite a while. Peter, please go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you, Johan. Firstly, to Judy, and really well done. It's so fascinating to see the execution that has taken place. A formidable achievement of action, I must say, in a very difficult setting. My question is, to what extent do you get support from the regulator? The authorities, the regulators, they are meant to assist with the policing of your waterways and reserves. Do you get the necessary support? That's the first thing. And then second question, is there any chance of extending your MPAs to fully cover all the coral sections that might be exposed? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. I will say we get support from the regulatory body. That is, so the laws are there to protect these ecosystems. And we're also uniquely placed within the domain of Kisite Mpunguti Marine Park, which is under the stewardship of Kenya Wildlife Service in Shimoni. And the support we get from them is really good, it's outstanding. But, no, not a but actually, it's just an addition. In addition to that, so how the marine resources are managed within this area is along the coast of Kenya is actually really unique, because we have the beach management units that are made up of members from the community. And so together with KWS and Kenya Wildlife Service and other regulatory bodies, they come together and actually ensure that these environments are actually being protected. So within here, within this environment, we have Kenya Wildlife Service, but we also have the Mkwiro Beach Management Unit, which we work in close ties with. We have Wasimi Beach Management Unit, Shimoni Beach Management Unit, and all these different organizations are actually located within a pretty small area. We also have Kibuyuni Beach Management Unit, and they all come together to try and conserve these environments.
Thank you.
I hope I answered your question.
Thank you. And do you deal with poachers a lot? Is there poaching taking place at all?
I think maybe with certain maybe species like turtles, there's been reported cases of poaching, but I feel like that is being actively dealt with. I might add that turtles is not exactly our domain, but just being in this region and hearing about turtles and turtle poaching, I think it's an issue that's definitely there. But over time, as education and outreach is reaching a more vast audience, then we're seeing or hearing that instances of such events like poaching are actually reducing over time. So I'll again reiterate that is not our particular area of expertise, but word on the streets or word on the seas is that turtle poaching is on the decline as well.
But to add on to what Bulisa is saying, the Kenya Wildlife Service here in the Kisite Mpunguti Marine Park, they are very good with the community, dealing with the community in terms of poaching and creating awareness on turtles and the marine animals around this area. So that's a plus. The awareness is going on. So yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you for the answer. And that's good news as well. I saw another Peter had his hand up, but then disappeared. I think it was Peter Musila. If you somehow still want to ask a question, please raise your hand again. Yvonne, I see you there. I just want to jump to the chat quickly. I see Cheryl Ogilvie had a question there. How long does it take for coral to attach to a hard surface and start to grow? That's the first question. What educational programs have been done to stop the devastation in terms of fishermen, ships, and pollution?
On how long the corals take to attach themselves. So what we do, we attach these corals. I'm not really sure on the time, but what we do with the artificial structures, we attach them using tie wraps or cable ties onto the structure to ensure that these corals is not moved by waves or currents or water movement. So it's really held onto the structure so it cannot move. But attaching onto the structure, it takes time, but not sure on the exact amount of time, but it takes time. Also on the education program, we are very lucky to have support from the local schools and the local community around here. So we do have education programs in the schools. We have outreach programs around here to educate the community on the importance of the restoration that we are doing and the work and the marine life in the channel. So it's going on, it's ongoing. The education and awareness is ongoing. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much for the answer. I see Peter Musila, his hand is back. If one of you will allow, I know he had his hand up, so I just want to help him there. Peter, if you could please unmute and ask your question.
Hello. I just wanted to congratulate Bulisa and Judy for the presentation. And I remember actually a question to them. Do you think maybe you mentioned about using different corals for, do you think there could be there could be more resilient corals like to bleaching that could be much more better to restore, to use rather, I mean, sorry, I don't know if you understand my question. I mean, what do you think about resilience of the corals to need? Because if you have seen, if you have said bleaching is the main, is the bigger problem, would you using resilient corals for restoration would actually improve like the long-term maybe yeah.
I think I get the drift of your question, and I would say globally it's becoming more pronounced, the need to grow and establish and promote the growth of resilient corals is actually becoming more and more pronounced. We have sorry, various research that's going on in labs around the world, and that's tuned to this fact. I will talk about the Wasini channel and how we are trying to ensure the growth of resilient corals. As you've seen in some of the slides, we have a unique phenomenon where the low tide completely exposes some corals, yeah? So we assume that those corals are uniquely adapted to higher temperatures, higher water temperatures, and being subjected to higher periods of heat, yeah? So we have various experiments that are working with such species within the channel. We also have experiments that look, as Judy said, look at the different depths that corals can grow in an optimum condition. So while we're doing these experiments, what we're essentially doing is trying to compare the species that we have to each other, and we're trying to see what does well in this type of environment. So as research is a huge part of the restoration we do here, I would say that different environments obviously require different techniques, as Judy also alluded to that fact. So I would say across the coast, maybe the restoration we're doing within the channel here might not work just as well in another particular location. So I guess just working with the species that you have in your current environment will promote the growth and thriving of these reefs that we're trying to restore.
Okay, thank you very much, Bulisa, for that. Yvonne, please go ahead and ask your question.
Oh, well, mine is not a question. I just also want to help answer some of the questions that are asked. I am a colleague to Bulisa and Judy.
Welcome.
So Yeah, with regards to support from the government, we work through the beach management units. As I've explained in the chat, the beach management units are part of the government system for co-management of natural resources, which means we're already working together with the government through the beach management units, which are CBOs, comprised of fisher folks, people who depend on the marine resource and live in a particular area. So with support, we are really 100% on support from the government and from the regulating bodies here in this country in Kenya. There was also a question on the awareness and education to the fishermen to help them reduce the deforestation. So the reason why we have artificial reefs in our area, because like Bulisa and Judy have mentioned, in the past, there was dynamite fishing in this area. That's why we do not have substrate as at now, and we have to use artificial reefs. Now, before we began the project, there was a lot of meetings between the community and REEFolution and the government stakeholders that are based in this region to actually make them understand why we want to do what we want to do. Since the beach management unit is in charge of an area, we have to first get permission from the community because this is an area where they depend on fishing, they depend on their livelihood activities. They had to be made to understand why conservation is going to take place in this area. And it's been 7 years, and right now they can also already say they see profits from the conservation because there's an increase in fish catch. But the area has been divided into 3 categories. There's an area where it's a breeding zone. It's a purely breeding zone where no fishing activities are allowed. And this is only possible if the community around it supports. So we have really good community support, and sensitization and awareness continues to be done every day.
Thank you. You run a really comprehensive program, and I think other programs in Africa and along the coast of the islands in the Indian Ocean can really learn from you as well. It's really impressive. There's a question from Sipilele. Besides climate change being the major risk for the destruction of coral reefs, are there any threats that could be the reason reefs undergo destruction? If so, what steps can be taken to reduce that, knowing that the human population is growing and is behind these threats? So I know you've perhaps partially answered the question, but any further comments on the question?
I think just maybe like to reiterate the fact of education and awareness. Yeah, so for example, we have an education program with some local primary schools within the area. So we're trying to teach, and I'd say learn, because we also learn a lot from the young kids. And we teach and learn about conservation. And so we're actively educating the next generation that I think I'm also part of, but that's why I say we're learning together. But so we're trying to educate the next generation. The outreach towards local fishermen and other people who depend on the reefs is also super important. So in the presentation, you see, we tried to differentiate between the global and the localized threats. Obviously, the localized threats are, I wouldn't say, okay, they're easier to tackle, but if we at least try and segregate them into two sections, we can try and deal with them systematically and try to see what's possible and what's realistic in our situation at the moment and what's not. For example, the emission of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. We recognize that maybe at this point, it's happening, the reduction in those emissions is happening much slower than I'm sure all of us would like it to happen. So we have to try and adapt and try to make these reefs as resilient as possible. So I've gone on a bit of a tangent there, but I hope I answered the question.
It's a good tangent. Thank you very much. Ruan, you had your hand up. Sorry, it must have got tired by now and you dropped it again.
You can go to Dr. Taylor. It's fine. I'll ask my question after his. It's all good.
Everything is okay. Dr. Taylor, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks very much. I thought it was a great talk, and congratulations on the superb work you're doing. I put that in the chat box, but I have to say it again. I wanted to put it back in the chat box the second time. I want to ask you what impact, whether you have any idea on what impact microplastic beads have on the food ingestion and the nutrition of corals?
So we aren't actively doing research into that. We know of an organization that is actually working and trying to find out what exactly the effects are of those microplastics. But sorry, if you could just repeat the second phase of that question so that I can answer.
Yeah, it's just now, I just want to get an idea of what effects they actually have on nutrition, because, you know, it gives the animal a false sense of its nutrition in terms of you know, the volumes of food and so forth that it ingests. And I mean, it's common in fish, or it has been shown to be a negative impact in fish, but I just don't know how much has been done on corals. I know that's not your main area of work and so forth, but I just thought you might know something about that possibly to tell us.
What I can say is that I know now that it comes to mind, a second organization that are actually really looking into it. So even just the phenomenon you described, I think the ingestion of those microplastics, or in some cases macroplastics, as we'll see, I'll digress maybe a little bit. Turtles have been known to ingest quite large pieces of plastic as well. And
Yeah, sure.
not only does that as a secondary effect affect our own health, not in the case of turtles, we don't eat turtles, but in the case of fish, eating those fish will be devastating over time to our health. But we have to look also at the fish themselves that are ingesting those plastics, yeah? So it's definitely an issue. Even as we go out, I think we've done 2 beach cleanups in the past 2 days, yeah? We see the amount of plastic that's washing ashore. Yeah, we do underwater cleanups from time to time, and we see plastic that basically found itself a home in the ocean. And it's a conundrum that I personally can't wrap my head around, because you do a cleanup today, tomorrow, next week, in 2 weeks, it's the same amount of plastic that you're collecting, because it just seems like there's an endless factory of plastic, which there is actually, into the sea. But yeah.
Yeah, no, thanks. Yeah, thanks. I was just wondering about the effect, particularly on coral species. But great, thanks so much for your answers. Fantastic, thank you.
So sorry, Dr. Taylor, we really have not conducted, like Bulisa said, we've not conducted any studies on this. But like he also mentioned, there's an organization that does this, and we're looking on how we can partner in future so that they can come and carry out the studies. It's an interesting topic for us as well, but we can't really answer right now. So yeah, thank you.
Oh, thank you. Good luck.
Wait,
Thank you.
can I add a point? So I think I may have misunderstood your question a little bit. So in regard to coral species, yeah, if we can remember from the structure of the coral polyp itself, yeah, it has that tiny opening, yeah, the tiny opening where that's the mouth and also the anus of the coral. So these microplastics, if they get dislodged or ingested by the corals, then that leads to some of the disease and the introduction to chemicals as a result of these microplastics into the actual body of the coral polyp. I think there's extensive research into sunscreen, for example. Yeah. So now we have reef safe sunscreen and we have normal sunscreen. And the normal sunscreen actually has these micro fragments that can actually do what I just described. Yeah. So hopefully that gives more insight, and hopefully I've answered your question a little bit better now.
Oh, no, great. Thank you very much. Thank you. It's great.
I wonder 80% on your side. Give him a round of applause, man. He did his best. Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bulisa, a question, to both of you. From the chat from Kathy Drummond, which are the main species you use for restoring the reefs?
Right now, we deal with the branching corals because what are they called? Massive corals don't really do well in our area. So right now we are dealing with the Acropora species. The Acropora really does well in this area and it grows really fast over time. We also deal with the Pocillopora species, we deal with the Porites and the Millepora. So these 4 species really do well in our area. Not to say that we don't deal with other species, we do, but these 4 species really do well in this area, especially the Acropora. It grows really fast in this channel. So that's what we mainly deal with.
Fantastic. Yeah. Thank you very much. Andy, please go ahead, ask your question.
Thank you, guys. I just wondered what inspired you both to get into this field and do this sort of work? And also, have you got a program to train, you know, the next wave, we'll call it, of divers from the young people you're working with in your community?
Yes, so you want to go first?
Yeah. So I have a background in marine resource management. So I really wanted to understand more about the marine life. So that's where my interest comes from. And I was really fortunate to join REEFolution and work together with amazing people that share the same interest with me. So we work with the community, we are all diverse, the people that work with the coral restoration. So we engage with the community. So as Yvonne said earlier, we work with the Mkuru Beach Management Unit. So they have part of their members that work with us, and they are all diverse. So basically, we are all diverse, and it's amazing underwater. So yeah, and I love the ocean.
So I was inspired by just conservation as a whole. So for my bachelor's degree, I did environmental science. And although I didn't grow up around the coast, I was always fascinated by the ocean and took every opportunity I could to travel to the coast.
Maybe just to step in, maybe their connection, something is wrong with their connection. But yeah, Bulisa will be able to finish his inspiration. To just answer the question, I mentioned we have a Reef Ranger program, which Bulisa and Judy are part of. So the Reef Ranger program, it's a program that we've tailored to make sure, you know, we don't run out of reef rangers. Is you get to learn, if you also, it has different level of skills and requires just up to secondary school education. So that's from the community side. We keep getting volunteers who start learning with us. You start fish ID, coral species identification, then you're taught how to swim, dive, be underwater. So it's a program that's continuous. Once Bulisa and Judy gets to their dive master level, I'm sure we'll have more people coming in, because currently we also have people in training, both graduates and from the local community.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you.
Thanks, Yvonne. There's a question from Christian from TUT. What are the measures that can be taken to prevent fishermen or to slow them down from destroying the marine ecosystem?
So the regulations are the regulations are set and they are in place, and they are essentially policed or by the beach management unit. Yeah. So the regulations, let's say in terms of net size or what type of fishing is allowed in a particular area, respecting and setting boundaries for no fishing zones. Yeah, all that is undertaken by the beach management units, which are comprised of local community members who understand and the need to conserve these ecosystems. I'd say they're very effective in conserving these environments. I hope we're not painting a utopia of the restoration in Shimoni, but I'm honestly proud to be part of this whole community and seeing what we're doing in terms of natural resource conservation and in particular coral restoration. So the communities here are actually good stewards of the environments that we're blessed with.
Yeah, Bulisa, to add just on that as well. So it's really, the fishermen don't really destroy the areas that, you know, we are conserving. It's a notion that maybe we need to step away from, because currently the fishermen are our biggest supporters. They actually see that restoration is helping, and it has, yes, it's something that's continuous, and we want to change more minds. But I would like to say that the community we have here, they are very supportive of what we do. And I would just like people to also stop thinking that fishermen really destroy it, because currently they're not the major cause, they're not the major threat to our marine environment. We just need to make them understand how they can sustainably fish without, you know, overfishing, because the biggest problem is just overfishing. But using illegal methods, they've really stopped. So yeah.
Thank you, Yvonne. That's really enlightening. Ruan, please go ahead.
Lovely. Thank you. My question is a bit of a chemical one, and it's both to all three of you. And it's just occurred to me, I never wondered, I've dived many times in my life, but the material that you use when you create artificial reefs, the metal or the concrete, or whatever, is there any materials that you steer ahead of, or away of? Are there anything, is it normal alloy you use, or is it normal steel, normal concrete? Is there some substances that you avoid when creating these artificial structures that are harmful to the coral species? Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll try and answer the question in phases, yeah?
Okay,
so
cool.
For example, with the nursery trees, we use sturdy PPR pipes, and I emphasis on sturdy, so they're long lasting, yeah? They're long lasting. So unfortunately it's plastic, but believe it's in this particular case a bit of a necessary evil. But we put those plastic, those PPR nursery trees, they last for a really, really long time, and they're long lasting. They can, the trees that we put in at the beginning of the project that are still there, still in good condition. So as opposed to other methods or weaker plastics that would probably disintegrate or break often, that would have to keep replacing. So PPR for the nursery trees is what we stick with. And for some of the cement-based structures, there's actually a study that was conducted here at REEFolution trying to see the effects that cement curing has on coral reef, coral growth, and also the effects of that cement to maybe the surrounding environment. So as I said, like a lot of the stuff we do is heavily research based. So we're really trying to avoid putting something in just because it works. We also have to see that we're not doing the opposite of what we're trying to do. We use metal rebar again for the same sturdiness. So I think it's iron rebar. And once again, it serves first as a really, really good base for the corals to latch onto and attach to. And once again, very, very long lasting with reduced detrimental effects to the surrounding environment or ecosystems around there.
Also, to add on what Bulisa is saying, some of these artificial structures that we use keep on improving over time. So if you can look back from some of the structures that we started with, they have improved. So we keep on improving. Different experiments are being done, like the cement curing, to see what works best for the corals and for our restoration area.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. You on?
In that regard, Dr. Cheryl Ogilvie is asking whether you considered using recycled plastic, as it is then slightly more environmentally friendly. I don't know if you want to comment on that, or it's just a novel idea. And then also Kathy Drummond, I just wanted to also mention and thank Kathy for all the comments she's making in the chat. There are also studies currently being done on the reefs of Sodwana looking at the effect of DDT and organophosphate seepage into the ocean on the corals. Do you have similar problems where you are at all with agricultural runoff perhaps?
So not at the moment. I would say, okay, maybe not that we know of. So the area we find ourselves in is largely fishing communities. So the agricultural practices tend to be much farther inland. But I will say it would be, I'm actually curious to see whether even that far away, whether it has an effect on the environment within the channel, because I reckon it would still have an effect. So that is something for us to look into as well. And thank you, Kathy, for that comment.
There's a master's degree or PhD problem to be solved. Dr. O, you're welcome to ask your question.
Yes, I'm getting onto that, the recycled plastic, because we have bought those tables that are so durable and hard, and they don't burn, they don't rust, they don't do anything. The kids jump on them, they don't break. So maybe that's a kind of a way of actually making something really solid, and yeah, it shouldn't break down. So I think that's a way to go to make some. Maybe you can do a master's on it to see what structures actually work the best for the coral to attach to.
Might you know the organization that or company that makes those tables? Maybe we can get into contact with them.
Cheryl, if you can pass the information on to us, we will relay it.
Oh, sure. I'll definitely. There's a few companies that are making them, and I know for a fact. I mean, if the children can't break them, then I definitely don't see anything else breaking them. If I talk about that, my kids are really rough and they can break things, but these tables have stood the time and they still look good. And I'm sure, and they get a kind of a very rough surface. So I'm sure your coral may like that when you get them in different color as well. So you make it brown and you make it green and whatever. I don't know, but I'll put you in contact with them because it's a nice way to get rid of the plastic. I'm not saying put it back into the sea, but I mean they can be removed in big structures.
Yeah, very true. Thank you.
Yeah, that would be lovely.
There is a practical question from Carol Preston. Whoops, and there goes my practical question. Do you remove the cable ties from the coral once it has attached, or do the ties get buried into the new coral?
So actually, the coral overgrows on the cable ties, but the excess cable, we cut it and remove it from the water. Otherwise, leaving it there will allow algae to overgrow on the cable tie. So we remove the excess one, but the one that's tying the coral remains there and the corals overgrow on it. So yeah.
Attention to detail, right? Cheryl, you've got your hand up again.
Now, I just want to say you guys rock, if I can put it that way. I had, I think, 20-something students online tonight, and I think you've just shown them how it's done and how passionate the youth can actually be. In actual fact, while you were talking, I was calling you, you are true eco-warriors, and I would like to thank you for that. And please carry on making a difference and changing the youth. I know you're talking about educating children in schools. If you can plant a little seed in one little child, you have made a difference, and keep on doing it. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just to add, we also have a program, a volunteering program, where students from abroad come to help out with the project, students who have a background in marine science and want to do some thesis to figure out some of the questions that have been raised, for example, tonight. We also have a program with schools from the UK called Camps International, where I think it's gap year students also come, try get involved in the conservation work. Everybody in the chat is welcome to join us. So if you feel like you want to join us, you're very welcome.
There's a hand. There's a
There
hand.
we go. I was just wondering about Marty not asking a question. Well, there we go. At the last minute, Marty.
Fine. And where's your photo of a coral?
Yeah.
No, my second name is Carl, so that'll have to do. Marty, Carl, Jasper. So I'm going to ask you a bit of a weird and wacky question. I hope you don't mind about it, but I mean, you guys explained the whole structure of a coral and the stomach and the mouth and the reproductive side and whatever. But does a coral actually have a brain? I mean, it's like quite a, like, does it make decisions, or it just exists? And if the conditions are right, it survives. And if the conditions are bad, it fracks. It's like quite a weird concept to get around, that it doesn't have any means of making a decision about where it goes or how it survives, or okay, the conditions are bad, let me go into some stage of what's it, hibernation or something like that. It either yeah, so I mean, does it have any ability to have a brain? I mean, are there parts that make decisions within a coral? That's probably a crazy question, but
that's a good one. But no.
So I wouldn't say it has a brain, but I understand, because some of the decisions actually seem quite complex, like the mass spawning events. So a coral is basically, it's an invertebrate, so no central nervous system like that has maybe a spinal cord or a brain that they're coming together to form that central nervous system. So I don't know how to like factually answer your question, but I would say it's also pretty interesting to understand how certain decisions are made. The tentacles that we talked about in the structure are also used to ward off other invading corals that are trying to encroach into another's territory or colony. The mass spawning events, where different corals of different colonies spawn together at the same time, is actually also quite unique. So I'd say there are certain conditions that kind of maybe like flip a switch. For example, the heat threshold, the coral will know to expel the algae from its body. During the mass spawning events, the lunar cycle, temperature, and other factors come together, and then the coral somehow knows what to do in that moment. So not a wacky question, maybe slightly wacky answer, but but it's something that maybe I myself and Judy here and everyone, should maybe try and look into further, because I'm sure there's a more factual response than the one I've given. But thank you.
no, cool. I mean, I think possibly almost more in a way like a bacteria. I mean, we kind of think of bacteria and they're out to kill us, but they aren't. They're just trying to survive, and in their survival, it causes diseases and other things. So, but yeah, it's just so thanks for your answer. I kind of sort of had thought maybe that's what it is, but as you say, there seem to be a lot of factors and different things happening that cause it to reproduce, or asexually or sexually or whatever, and it's like what's making those decisions. But cool, thanks a lot. Hopefully you can write a research paper on it.
One day. Thank you.
Thanks guys for everything. It was great.
Thank you, Marty.
Marty, there's a brilliant book written by Charles Darwin that has all the answers in it. Origin of Species. It's called Evolution. But truly, and just because I studied zoology, and I know a little bit about it. I did invertebrate. I studied invertebrates for a very long time, and it's all to do with exactly as you said, Bulisa, environmental pressures and how an organism adapts to those pressures, or as we call it, natural selection. And then either it survives or it dies, or there is a fluke and it has some mutation that changes it, and it can adapt to various changes in its environment. But no central nervous system as we have in mammals or vertebrate species. So sentient, definitely not as far as the word goes, but it's a good question, Marty. It's a really good question, and it deserves a good answer. But old Darwin and Wallace got us to it, especially Darwin's research on barnacles. I think is worthwhile reading, although they're not really related to the corals. But yeah, read Origin of Species. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.
Maret also just reminded me that we sort of had the same question that came up with Krish when we discussed jellyfish. It's also the question, how do you define intelligence?
Yeah, it's a good one. It's a good...
Marty, is your hand up again? I'm not sure. Or is it still up?
Yeah, so I just wanted to comment from what Rion said. So in terms of evolution, if it was as simple and straightforward, then the coral would have evolved to have a brain, I would have thought. So
Not necessarily. Not necessarily.
But yeah, that was my little cheeky response, but I couldn't talk, so.
No, it's fine. It's fine. But Dr. Taylor gave a brilliant answer in the and it's all to do with morphology about the new rudimentary nervous system called the nerve net. But Dr. Taylor, your hand is up, so if you want to add to that, then all good. Brilliant. It's actually, let's just unmute you. Oh, there we go. Oh, sorry, Dr. Taylor. It was me.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't think you'd read the chat. Yeah, the Nigeria just have a very rudimentary nervous system, so it's just it's called a nerve net, and so there's no brain, there aren't any ganglia or anything like that that are advanced that you'd find in the anterior part of the body. It's really just a net of nerves that extend over the whole body, which basically function then as a very, very rudimentary nervous system. But it's the beginnings of the evolution of the nervous system throughout the entire animal kingdom, and it becomes more and more advanced, obviously, as you run through the animal kingdom and so forth.
Thank you.
Sorry, Johan, forgive me, but there's a brilliant, that's why I shut off my video for a moment. If you can find it, Marty, it was a prescribed book when I was a first year. It's called The Introduction to the Invertebrates by Janet Moore. Nice. Absolutely brilliant book. And I don't know if anyone knows about it, but it's a brilliant book explaining absolutely all the questions that Marty now had and that Dr. Taylor was explaining.
Thank you, everybody. We are down to 27 people now. It's been an absolutely fascinating conversation tonight as well, on top of a great presentation. So thank you so much, Judy, Bulisa, and also Yvonne. We really enjoyed listening to all of you, and it was great to have you as guests. Please keep on joining us on Thursday evenings. It would be lovely to see your faces again, and also you are an inspiration to other young people. So please keep on doing the work and keep on having the standard of excellence that you are currently maintaining.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
We're privileged to share this space with all of you, and look forward to learning more as we tune into other sessions as well. But once again, thank you for having us here. And as I said, as I keep saying, you know, we're trying to teach, but we're also learning. So, you know, we came into this session with a PowerPoint that we've prepared, but we're going away with all this different knowledge that we didn't know before, yeah? And in some ways, even specific to corals, like the nerve nets that Dr. Taylor has just talked to us about. We even get material like the book Introduction to Invertebrates. So we have stuff to look forward to study about. So once again, it's a privilege to be part of this space, and we look forward to being a part of it going forward.